Stoliar. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Scotty. How about yourself?
I'm absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
My pleasure. Take care now. Bye-bye.
That was great. It's easier, honestly, for the YouTube algorithm when things are really short. It means people are more likely to
You
watch
should
it
always leave them wanting more.
and give them nothing at all. They have to
Right.
they not just more, they have to want anything.
So we're here to discuss the history of percussion instruments. Is that it?
Exactly.
The development from claves to timpani and back again.
Exactly. We're going back thousands of years.
That's
I've
fine.
spent I spent the last
Paleolithic.
exactly. I spent the last, I would say, like week and a half. I went to music school, so I called all my professors. I told them, I said, tell me every fact you know about percussion, and that's what we're gonna do tonight. So I hope that goes well.
Okay, that's fine.
Wait,
Can
Steve,
you hear people switching to something else all over the America right now?
actually, no, but I just know for sure that they are. If I
Well,
could
that's
hear it, it would be great, though. It'd be nice to know.
okay.
It's okay. No one's ever tuned in to the show ever, so they don't even
All
have to tune out.
all seriousness aside, as Steve Allen liked to say.
Wait, Steve, where are you coming to us from right now?
Right in my apartment. I'm
And
in Studio City, California, where it's hot, but I'm in the comfort of central air conditioning.
is it nice hot or is it absolutely
I
fucking
don't
miserable hot?
really, unlike the gecko behind you, I don't thrive on heat. I like refrigeration. And you may ask, why then are you living in California? And that's a valid question without a good answer. But no,
Hollywood.
yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
Also, I grew up out here, assuming I've grown up.
Yeah. You're originally from Missouri, right? University City?
Yes, University City, when it was University City 30, Missouri, before they had complete zip codes.
Oh,
This
I didn't
is
know that.
really getting into antiquity here. Yes. And
uh,
we moved out here when I was pushing 8 years old, but I still have very fond memories of lightning bugs and building snowmen, not at the same time, of course,
mhm.
but different times of year. I have very happy childhood memories of St. Louis.
Do you go back often?
I haven't been there in a long time, no, but it doesn't tamper with my childhood memories.
When's the last time you went back?
Decades.
Really?
Yeah.
Any particular reason? Just never got the chance.
I just don't tend to be very nomadic. It's always difficult to pull me out of my apartment, not to go meet someone for lunch or something, but I'm always hemming and hawing about travel. And I think, oh, who's going to feed the cat? And how much is the ticket going to cost? And where am I going to, and it's just easier to go, and then all of a sudden 25 years have gone by.
I'm exactly the same way. Like the other night, a couple buddies of mine, they opened this park on the west side of Manhattan, and they have like range golfing. Is that what it's called? You know, where you just you hit a bucket
Oh,
of
yeah.
balls. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, but it's $35 a lane, split two ways. And I'm like, okay, so tax is $18, $19. Let's say 20. After tax, all that. And I was like, I could get some good food for that. I'd rather sit at my house, and I'd rather order out, or
Yeah.
I'd rather do neither, and then it's $20 in my pocket. So it's even better.
It's like you've paid yourself to not go.
That's exactly it. And this show isn't paying me, so I have to do it somehow.
All right.
Yeah. So
We did discuss my fee, didn't we?
$5,000.
Yeah, but I have to
Okay.
pay it in installments to you. I hope that's okay.
I
All
appreciate that.
It's silly time. People aren't silly enough. There's too much going on in the world to not be silly.
I totally agree. That's a big thing. Like one of the concepts that I had when I wanted to start interviewing people was I was like, I wanted to talk very casually. Like you go through and you talk about like highlights and stuff, but I wanted it to be a place where people can have fun and enjoy something. 'Cause I
Yeah,
feel like
you
no
don't
one
want it to
enjoys
sound
anything.
like FM at 3 a.m. Well, we reach out to various organizations within the community to try to raise awareness for this issue, which I believe is probably in the forefront of issues that face us all. And so we welcome input. Yeah, we don't want to do that.
It's awful.
So let's pretend I didn't just do that.
Well, you did
Another
it
reason for
ironically,
them
so
to
it's okay.
change the. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Air quotes.
Yeah, exactly. No, I always like the idea of like I think the best way to get to know people, especially like if you're someone just, watching this video and they want to get to know you, I think the best way to do it is it's not in some like, written out format where it's like
Brian,
this is
what's
a
your
point,
favorite
this is
color?
and it's, because you're not going to really learn anything about who the person actually is that way. You're going to learn like talking points,
Right.
but you're not going to really get to know him. Plus, I just want to have fun. You know what I mean? I don't want to. You see all like you said, all those like late night things, and it's always like today's sponsor is the so and so and so and so and so and so. It's a foundation. It's like yeah, there's a place for that, but there's so many places for that. There's want to have fun
That isn't
sometimes.
this. Let's be
No,
something different.
exactly. Um, so I was gonna ask. I don't know why I'm talking and drinking the coffee at the same time.
Are you studying ventriloquism?
Exactly. That's exactly what's
Okay.
going on. It's a coffee character I'm coming up with.
There.
You're
See, it worked.
fantastic. You're fantastic. The best way is you just close your mouth and you don't say anything. The best ventriloquist, because no one can even see you talking.
Well, Edgar Vergen was very big on the radio, and he you could no one could see lips on the radio. So
Yeah.
anyway,
So wait, you said you ended up moving to around L.A., but you're originally from what like age from when you're born to like age 8. You're from Missouri.
yes.
Okay.
And then
What?
my father's company sent him westward, and so we took Route 66 from the
Oh.
song of the same name, and went westward and to check it out. And then actually, when we flew, we drove so that we could leave the family car in LA. And then when we actually moved from St. Louis, we flew. And I had, from watching I Love Lucy, I got the impression that there were always celebrities walking around Los Angeles because Lucy would run into William Holden or John Wayne or Harpo Marx or someone. So I figured that, in my 8-year-old mind, that was what LA was like. And as it turned out, on the airplane out here, Andy Griffith was sitting several rows ahead of me, and Red Skelton was sitting directly in front of us and kept turning around. He had one of those pop guns where you push the back and the cork on a string comes out. And he kept that tucked into his sports jacket. And every now and again, he would turn around and shoot me with it. And I thought it really is like I Love Lucy. We haven't even landed in Los Angeles, and I've already got Red Skelton and Andy Griffith's autograph. Do not try to smuggle a pop gun on a plane now. Things were different in 1962. There were no metal detectors or hijackings or anything like that. Anyway, that's how I came to LA.
I heard you say Red was much nicer than Andy Griffith, right? I think you say that in your book, right?
Oh yeah, he was. Griffith was kind of surly. I didn't have much interaction with him, but it was sort of begrudgingly gave me his autograph. But Skelton was really wonderful. And my older sister, Carol, was crying because her boyfriend didn't come to the airport to see her off. So Skelton gave her his handkerchief. And then my sister, who was other sister, Patty, was interested in art. Skelton drew a sketch of the cover of the menu. This is how long ago it was. They had menus on airplanes, and it had like a still life of a little bud vase and some flowers. And he drew a little sketch and gave it to her, which she framed and can't find, but swears is still in the house somewhere.
Were
So
you
he managed to amuse the 3 Stoliar children on the trek from I'm guessing that there must have been a CBS affiliates meeting in St. Louis in the summer or fall of 62 for Skelton and Griffith to be on the same flight with us. But
Mhm.
that was pretty cool. And, I've been spotting celebrities ever since. I have a pretty good knack for recognizing people out of makeup or obscure character actors. and they're often startled that I recognize who they are. One of the ones that I'm proudest of is I went to dinner at a Chinese restaurant with a friend of mine some years back, and we came outside, and I saw this woman with uh, red hair talking to someone, waiting for the valet to bring the car. And I said, "Excuse me, aren't you Marnie Nixon?" And she said, "Yes, but how did you recognize me?" And I said, "I always thought you looked like Julie Andrews." Marnie Nixon was the singing voice of Natalie Wood in West Side Story, and
Oh.
Deborah Carr in The King and I, and My Fair Lady instead of Audrey Hepburn. And so I got my friend, I said, "Nina, this is Marnie Nixon." And she went, "Oh my God, you were everybody." And she couldn't believe that anyone had recognized her. And I went home and looked on IMDb just to remind me of all the things she had done. And in her biography under trivia, it said, "She's not the sort of celebrity people stop on the sidewalk and recognize." And I thought, did she just race home and upload that onto her IMDb? But
What year was
anyway,
that?
oh, that was like 2009,
Okay, so pretty recent.
compared to 62, yes.
That's true. That's much more recent. Wait, well, when you ran into Red Skelton and Andy Griffith, like I said, you're only around 8. Were you a big fan
Right.
of theirs when were you like shell shocked when you got in the plane?
I knew who they were because we watched both their shows in our house.
Okay.
Now, if I met Andy Griffith, which I won't be doing, I would want to ask him about A Face in the Crowd, which is a great cynical drama he did in 57, where he plays a megalomaniacal TV star who they hire him as this kind of aw shucks country down home guy, and then it goes to his head and he becomes a monster. And it's a great performance. It's completely unlike the Andy Griffith show, the affable father, you know.
Yeah, when
But
I was
I
young,
was,
we used to watch a
yeah,
bunch of the Andy Griffith show, especially like the Christmas episodes that they had, like, all those DVD compilations that have all
yeah.
different Christmas episodes, and I kind of grew up watching that show. Not as much as others. I was more of a Little House on the Prairie kind of a person. That was my family show. But I can't picture Andy Griffith doing like a serious drama. I mean, I've never seen him in anything
Oh,
else.
well, I mean, you can go on YouTube and I'm sure they have either scenes or the trailer or something. It's really good. It was directed by Elia Kazan, who did On the Waterfront, and it's really cynical and hard hitting. Walter Matthau is in a dramatic role, and Lee Remick is in it, and it's really good, and it almost prefigures someone like Trump, where this person who passes themselves off as one of the people turns out, when he gets the power, to have surrounded himself with yes men, and people wonder, how do we undo this now that it's out of control? So it's A Face in the Crowd, Andy Griffith, 1957.
I gotta go check it out. There's so many old movies like that because I'm pretty frequent like 80s and 90s and forward, but like before that, I don't know a ton of movies from that era, so I gotta
Well,
check that
that
out.
it doesn't bother me. It just tells me that there's more for you to discover if you
That's
want
true.
to if you want to dip into that pool.
Yeah, I was always a big like television person in terms of like dramas, like all the Netflix stuff, and then once Breaking Bad came to Netflix, that kind of changed my life in terms of I was always watching like those really long dramas, like what was it, 6 Feet Under, that old
Uh-huh.
HBO show. I love that kind of stuff. But then recently, I got started just watching an obscene amount of Martin Scorsese movies, and I think I watched like 8 of them. And then ever since then, I've just been trying to go through and watch like every movie that I know references to. And if someone said the name, I go, "Oh yeah, it has this and that," but I've never actually seen. I'm on Scarface right now, so I have so many classics that I
I'm
just haven't
assuming you
seen.
mean the Pacino version, not the 1932 Paul Muni version.
I didn't even know there was a 1930 Paul Muni
That was,
version.
yes, the Pacino is a remake. but
Oh,
that's the one most people know now.
okay. I got to watch that after I watch the Pacino one. Is it good?
I like it a lot. I mean, it's pretty violent, and it's before the Hays Code, so you have a lot of racy stuff.
Hmm.
And let's see, I think Howard Hughes produced it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's very good. And I
Yeah.
mean, it was loosely based on Al Capone, who was still around at the time.
Hmm.
So
That's kind of
anyway,
that's risque to do, is to make a movie that's based on someone who's still alive. That doesn't really happen as much anymore.
I suppose because everybody gets sued or you get boycotted, you marshal the troops to demand that they stop production or something like. I mean, certainly Orson Welles got in trouble with William Randolph Hearst when he made Citizen Kane, since it was clearly based on Hearst and Marion Davies and their relationship. And it was while Hearst was still alive, and he forbade any of his newspapers to review the film, and threatened him, and nothing came of it. But people warned Wells that you're taking a big chance going against a powerful business tycoon like William Randolph Hearst. But he pulled it off, and it's a great movie.
I think they
But
shot that movie at Paramount Studios, if I'm correct. Which they actually they shot a few. I think one or two Marx
RKO,
Brothers shows. RKO.
but RKO was adjacent to Paramount.
Mm. Okay.
Uh, so it's hard to say exactly. They may have shared location, backlot stuff. I'm not sure. But it was an RKO movie, which was right next to Paramount.
They shot a few Marx Brothers movies there too, I think.
Uh, Monkey Business and Horse Feathers and Duck Soup.
Okay.
Probably their three funniest movies were Paramount. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they shot the first two at Paramount in New York because they were still Broadway stars.
Hmm.
And then they came out to LA in 31 and made those three, and then moved over to MGM, which was like the Rolls Royce of movie studio.
It's not even there anymore, right? Isn't it Sony Studios now or something like that?
Yeah, but a lot of the buildings are the same. A lot of the sound stages are the same. A friend of mine was working on the reboot of One Day at a Time,
Hmm.
and Rita Moreno plays the matriarch of this family. And she's best known, I suppose, for West Side Story. She won Best Supporting Actress. But I also knew that she was under contract to MGM in the late 40s and 50s, and was in a lot of musicals and supporting roles, including Singing in the Rain.
Hmm.
And so during a break in the taping, I asked her if it felt familiar being back, and she said that the soundstage they were shooting One Day at a Time was one that she'd done a bunch of musicals on. So it was weird for her 60 years later to be working on there's the same roof and walls and the wooden catwalk and the place where the lights hang down and all that. She said that was like her growing up years were spent there.
Yeah.
So yeah, MGM's gone, but they haven't taken a wrecking ball to everything, luckily.
That's good. I like when they do
Yeah.
stuff like that. Like I recently went to go see Late Show with Colbert at Ed Sullivan Theater, and I watched Letterman a little bit the last like couple years, mostly just clips on YouTube. But it was cool to see the similarities. And now going back, I watched some more Letterman. It's cool to see that they kind of kept things similar. The vibe wasn't too different, and it's just cool to see that when they revamp something and they keep that same kind of
Yeah.
vibe in the building, and it was just I like to see it. I don't know if anyone
When
else
I,
cares
I
about that,
was
but
living I was living in New York in the early 80s because I was writing for Dick Cavett
hmm.
at HBO, and he took part in a TV special that was a salute to the Palace Theater, which was the premier vaudeville theater in the early 1900s. Playing the Palace was the epitome of having made it in vaudeville.
Hmm.
So this producer, Alexander Cohen, put together this big spectacular salute to the to the palace, and he actually had some people who had played the palace who were still around, and then there were other people who were playing people who had played the palace. And one of the people in the previous group who had actually been there in the 20s was George Burns. And I had met him at Groucho's some years earlier, but it was great to see him again. And behind all of the curtains against the wall, there was this series of heating pipes that was like a maze. It was, I would say it was a spiral, except it was a series of rectangles, almost like a maze,
Mm-hmm.
and against the back wall. And I thought, I've seen that somewhere. And I remembered I had a book that George Burns wrote, and there's a photo of him sitting at a table with that same heating thing from the 1920s, and he's playing with Gracie Allen and Eddie Cantor and Al Jolson on the same spot where I was standing, saying, I know I've seen that heating pipe somewhere before. So it's wild. I mean, I'm also a big history and archaeology fan. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's elements of that come into play when you recognize that something has been unchanged over 100 years.
Mm-hmm. When you were at UCLA, did you take any like history classes because you were interested in it?
Yeah, I was a history major.
Oh, okay, there you go.
And so, yeah, that was my major, and I loved it. It was great. You know, you only got a taste of different periods of history in high school,
Mm-hmm.
but then at college, you get this big, thick catalog of classes, which I guess is all online now. But the point was, you could pick just medieval England or colonial America or ancient Persia or something like that, and spend a whole quarter doing a deep dive into those periods of history. And then even from the start, even though I was a history major, I was taking history of film classes, because it was great to sit in this comfortable theater and watch 35 millimeter prints of classic films and get college credit for watching these great movies and then writing reviews or critiques or, you know, something about some aspect of them. But I loved sitting in it was Melnitz 1409 was the building and the room number. They've renamed it after someone, but that was where I spent hours watching beautiful prints of classic movies, which was just a great thing to intercut with the nuts and bolts things I had to study, science and history and English and all that. And then, you know, a couple times a week, just sit back in these comfortable chairs. I learned how to take notes by catching the reflection off the screen onto my spiral notebook and scrawling. Sometimes I couldn't read what I had written, but usually I could tell,
Mm-hmm.
and then go type it up. And I was always interested in old movies. And then I eventually shifted from history major to motion picture television.
Okay.
So, I mean, we've been dancing around the subject of Groucho and the Marx Brothers. I guess at some point, one of us should point out why we seem to be circling that subject.
Well, absolutely. We have your book, of course, Raised Eyebrows. Fantastic
Oh,
book. I am
thank you.
unfortunately I'm only about a third of the way through so far, but
I
it's
won't give
fantastic so
away.
far.
I won't give away the ending. I'll let you wonder if Groucho is still alive and 130 years old.
Well, I had an issue. I was going through the book, and usually when I interview people, you know, I go on the internet and I read as much information I can about them as possible, but it's not information that has been, you know, condensed and put together. And so as I'm listening to the book, I'm going, man, every question that I could ask is already being answered. So
Then we're
I
done here.
exactly, that was my issue. So I was listening to it and I'm going, I'm going to have to specifically do two things: ignore certain information so that way I don't, you know, disingenuously ask a question that doesn't need to be asked. Um, And then
Except
on
the people who are watching have not necessarily read or listened to my book, so you can't presuppose they know the stories.
that was the balance I was trying to have, is trying to,
Yeah,
get
that's
the
tough.
baseline, but not cover, every single bit of it.
Right.
I have the entire book here, and I was planning on reading it out for you, the full 11 and a half hours of it. And I thought maybe you would enjoy listening to that.
It was quite a task recording it, and it was recorded in a studio that was just beastly hot. It was someone's, it was upstairs of someone's house, and he was a professional engineer, and he was very good and knew what he was doing. But it was during a particular heat wave in California and recorded over several days. And we would have to take oxygen breaks because I would read pages and pages, and he had to turn off his air conditioning when he was recording because he didn't want the ambient hissing sound of the air conditioner.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, unlike heat that can be absorbed into bricks and seep out, you can't do that with air conditioning. It doesn't
Hmm.
soak into the walls and keep you cold. The minute you turn it off, you start. And so we would take oxygen and Diet Coke breaks. And we're just, I mean, my face was just dripping. And I'm trying to focus on the voices, shifting the voices, talking about different celebrities, and trying to deliver the story in an interesting way so it doesn't sound like I'm reading from a text in front of me, and also not pass out.
Yeah.
But it turned out well. But yes, 11 and a half hours, and that's edited.
Really.
But there, there weren't that many blown takes and all that, but it did take quite a while.
I don't know if
And I'm
Diet
glad
Coke
you're
is the
enjoying.
best uh, liquid to be drinking while you're dehydrated, because isn't there caffeine in Diet? That's probably making you more dehydrated, sweating and having the caffeine.
It was what I was craving at the time, and
So
the fact that I'm still alive and it came out pretty well is testament to the fact that it worked. I, you
absolutely.
know,
And the Audible, I have an Audible account that I actually there's two books that I have on my Audible right now. It's yours, and then it's
yes.
the revised version of Robert Cialdini's first book. And his
Oh, all right.
and it was, I think is his wife or
Bobette.
his Bobette. Yeah, I wasn't sure if they were married or not, but she's the one who got me your information.
Yes, she lived on our block in University City,
Oh wow, small
and
world.
she and my sister Patty have remained friends all these years, despite the separation and all that.
Hmm.
Which is really cool. It says a lot about people when they've maintained friendships for 60 years.
Unfortunately, I have not lived long enough to know if I will be friends with all the people I'm friends with now. But I hope so. Maybe, I don't know.
You think that you will be. You open up your high school yearbook and it says, "I know we'll always be friends, Leslie." And you're thinking, was Leslie male or female? Was it this Leslie or that, but I know we'll be friends forever.
Here's
But
the
you
thing,
never
Steve.
know.
I was
Huh?
homeschooled. I was homeschooled. So my yearbook doesn't exist, and if it did, it would be me and not even my brother because he was gone way before I was done with school. So mine would just be like me and my mother, I guess.
How how was your mother equipped to teach you whatever you would have been learning with professionals?
Yeah, we bought like these curriculums that basically they were curated by the school system, and so they were approved by the school. And basically, she would just read out of these textbooks, and we would do our absolute best to figure it out. Ended up working out really well because I was not social when I was a little kid. That's part of the reason they did it, is because I was like miserable if I wasn't with my mother when I was like 4 or 5.
But
'Cause
that's the 180-degree wrong decision. If you weren't sociable, don't isolate you. Pick you up with giant forceps and drop you where there are other people, and then go ahead and wet your pants and faint or whatever, and then you become acclimated to interpersonal relationships.
Oh,
I think.
I fully agree. I think just going like, deep into anything that terrifies you is the best way to go. But
Yeah.
the initial idea was I was basically going to kindergarten, crying all day. my mom was like, well, I'll homeschool him for a year and then we'll send him back out. And then we just kind of never did. What ended up happening is I was playing drums and I started working for a musical theater company, playing drums for all of their shows.
How old
And
were you?
I started doing that, I think, when I was 11 or 12.
Wow, that's
And
impressive.
well, no, not even. I was 12 when I started working at this regional company. But since I was like 9 or 10, I was working at local theaters. And it just so happened that it took a lot of time. And so it was on a schedule that wouldn't have worked if I was in public school. And I enjoyed doing it so much, playing all these shows. And I was doing, I was getting jobs working as a drummer in central New York that I wouldn't have had time to do, that I ended up just kind of staying homeschooled. And then my mom taught piano and I became friends with a bunch of her students. And because of that, I ended up just hanging out with all of these other high school kids.
Musicians.
Not well, yeah, I knew a bunch of musicians from gigs I did, but I just was ended up hanging out with a bunch of high schoolers. So I never really, I was always like in a good sized friend group my whole life, which I think is the reason that I'm not like named
A serial killer.
exactly. I'm not Jeffrey Dahmer. That's
He was
exactly what it
always
is.
quiet and kept to himself.
See, I was not sociable until I was like, I mean, I was always like a bitch. And I was a little kid. I was always screaming and a little that. But it was like 5 to 8. I was shy. And then ever since then, I've just been I like the sound of my own voice too much.
Well, it's all right.
But I was going to ask, so going back,
Yes, sir.
we're not going to jump around the topic too much. But who is it that first introduces you to the Marx Brothers in terms of just, seeing their films?
I think that I must have caught glimpses of them as a young child. I I had an Uncle Joe who was balding and had glasses and a mustache and smoked a cigar
Hmm.
and wiggled his eyebrows and had a great sense of humor. So when I really became aware of Groucho, I thought he's just like Uncle Joe. Um, I didn't really get into their movies till probably late junior high or early high school. And then I wondered where they'd been all my life, and I wanted to see all of their movies as quickly as I could. And unfortunately, there were no DVDs or streaming or Blu-ray or TCM or even VH video cassette things. I had to go through the TV guide each week and circle movies I wanted to see, even if they were on in the wee hours, and just kind of willed myself to stay awake and would one at a time cross off classic movies. Now, of course, if I mentioned a movie, you could take something out of your pocket and punch something in. You could watch Face in the Crowd while I'm talking, and you may end up doing that before long. um, but I took to them as soon as I was really aware of how wonderful they were. I just wanted to read everything about them. And Groucho was my favorite because of all of his wordplay, and also because he said the kind of things you wish you could say, but you don't want to get sent to the principal or sent to your room, which in your case would be the same thing since you
That's
were
exactly true.
homeschooled.
Yep.
Go to your room. Wait a minute, I'm in my room. Well, get out of your room. Um, and so, yeah, I became essentially an obsessive fan, except all I wanted to do was meet Groucho. I didn't want to kill him or marry him or anything like that. But I knew that he was old and frail, and the chances of that were slim to none. But through a remarkable set of circumstances, I ended up being his personal secretary and archivist for the last 3 years of his life, working in his house in Beverly Hills, initially 7 days a week during a summer vacation, and just immersing myself in my dream. It's like all I wanted to do was shake his hand and thank him for duck soup. And instead, I'm wading ankle deep in family photos from vaudeville and letters and scripts with his handwritten annotations, and meeting the other two brothers who were still alive were the straight men in the act, Zeppo and Gummo, who lived in Palm Springs. Harpo and Chico had died in the early 60s, so I never got to meet them. But I mean, I got to meet Mae West and Bob Hope and Steve Allen and Dick Cavett and um, some of the writers and directors of the Marx Brothers films and the people that worked on You Bet Your Life, Groucho's quiz show in the 50s. And just, I mean, the bottom line was being able to spend quality time with my hero under comfortable circumstances, just sitting at the lunch table asking him the questions I had been wondering for years and listening to his firsthand reminiscences about the world at the turn of the century and what it was like performing the night President Harding died in 1923, and knowing, being personal friends with George Gershwin and W.C. Fields and Irving Berlin and these legendary names. And it was just an astonishing dream come true. The dark side of it was getting close to my hero while he's fading out, because he was in his 80s and he had suffered strokes and you know was it was a slow fade out. And then the other challenge was dealing with the young woman in charge of his life, whose name was Erin Fleming, who was a struggling Canadian actress who started out as his secretary and then became his manager. And as he got weaker, he got more dependent on her. And she was just sort of a ruthless ruler, and everyone had to put up with her because she was the guardian of, you know, the golden fleece or whatever. And she was really unpredictable. She was literally mentally unbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, she took prescribed and recreational drugs. So it was a really volatile situation because she could fly into a rage over nothing, with screaming and throwing things and slamming doors and all this. She hired and fired people, you know, regularly. And it's fairly astonishing that I lasted as long as I did there, because sooner or later, people got on her wrong side because she was paranoid. And even if they were completely innocent, she would suspect them of something and then throw them out, have a shit fit, and that was it for them. And somehow I managed to avoid the chopping block.
Did you just get along with her just especially well or something? Or do you think it was like just luck?
I guess, you know, I didn't have any experience around anyone like that. I mean, our family was very low key. There was no screaming or slamming of cabinets or anything like that. It was a pretty middle of the road, close to the vest family. So I wasn't used to volatile personalities like that. It wasn't as if I had had experience with it. There wasn't substance abuse or alcoholism or anything like that in our family. But somehow I managed to, at you know, the age of 20, size up the longitude and latitude of her personality and just learn to play. It's like, hit the accelerator now, hit the brake now, go into another room now, talk to her now. But there was, as a matter of fact, because the rest of us in the household were very concerned about the impact she had on Groucho, even though he loved having her around. She would sometimes direct her rage at him, basically because she didn't want to accept that he was getting older and hazier. And she thought that by screaming and shaking him, she could knock the rust off the mechanism or something, and he'd be younger again. And apparently, I mean, according to his nurses, his blood pressure would shoot up dangerously high when she'd be on the rampage. And we thought it would be great if we could subtract her from the scene and maybe find someone else who was young and attractive to at least feed his ego hanging around someone like that, but that was not detrimental to his health.
But he
And
was
there
the
was
only
one,
person who could give that word, right?
well, yeah, that was, you know, we also worried that like a drug addict, whether taking him off Aaron cold turkey would be worse for his health than letting her stay on. And we did actually conspire to replace her with one of the nurses, Connie, who was young and attractive, but had a medical background and was good natured. And Groucho was fond of her. And we thought, we could sort of see. And Groucho's longtime friends who had been alienated by Aaron. It's such a classic story. The younger woman comes onto the scene in the twilight years of some strong old fellow, and the family and the old time friends are alienated as she sinks her claws in. That's sort of what happened. And they were eager to get back into Groucho's good graces without having to put up with her. So he was going to have a support system for after Aaron was removed. And then one night at my dorm at UCLA, my candlestick phone rang, and it was Aaron Fleming saying, "I understand you're in on a plot to get rid of me." And I, beshat myself. It was like 2:30 in the morning, so I had been asleep. And all of a sudden, and it's funny because for all of her paranoia, she was right this time. She saw enemies under every sheet of paper and shrub that weren't there. And here she was spot on. And I really don't know how I managed to talk my way. Oh, don't be silly, Aaron. I owe you the fact that I have the job. And then, and it seemed to put out the flame, and the whole revolt failed. And she stayed on until the last months of his life, when former employees had gone to the police to talk about Aaron over medicating Groucho and being concerned for his well-being. And there was a conservatorship hearing, sort of like the Britney Spears thing, where it's like, who would be responsible for him? And Aaron wasn't one of the choices. And in fact, I was in charge of the household on weekends. There were these two factions. There was Aaron and her friends, and then there was Groucho's son Arthur and his guys. And I was put in charge of kind of regulating when the two people from each team would come visit Groucho. And it was really stressful, although I knew it was an important job for me because we were all looking out for his best interest. And Aaron was just in a fury. I remember her on the phone to a friend saying, "Fucking servants are treating me like a cockroach." And it was the idea that I was just this kid that she had hired to take care of Groucho's fan mail and organize his memorabilia. And now I was saying, "Aaron, it's 8. I think that was the time we agreed that and it was, like Cruella de Vil or something. Just, she couldn't believe I had the audacity to deftly try to ask her to please leave now because someone else was coming over to visit."
How old was she at the time?
She was in her early 40s.
Okay. She's
And
not, is she still alive or no?
no, in 2003, she was staying at her mental health deteriorated after Groucho died, and she for a while lived on the street and was in and out of psych units at hospitals. And then she was living in a board and care facility. This sounds like I'm embellishing it, but I'm not. It was almost directly down from the Hollywood sign, was the building she was living in. And one night in 2003, she blew her brains out.
Really?
And no one knew why, whatever the last straw was. There were some people who had stayed in sporadic touch with her, and they said she remained rational for the most part when she stayed on her meds, but she often went off her meds. And her brother Russell came down from Canada and had her cremated and took the ashes back to Canada. And that was it for Aaron. We never knew this was years after my Groucho days,
Mm-hmm.
but it's sad, and I have compassion for people with mental problems, and suicide is a very sad ending. But boy, she made Groucho's last years a lot rougher than they needed to be, and she mistreated a lot of people. So, and some people feel like it was sort of poetic justice that her life spiraled downward after Groucho was gone.
Hmm.
But people are rarely all heroic or all villainous. Andre Gide said the color of truth is gray. And I have found that to be repeatedly true. So it may be my favorite motto, uh, that things are rarely all one side or another. And so with Erin, she did help, um, keep the spotlight on Groucho, and help financially by arranging for personal appearances and guest shots and things like that. And he loved the adulation, going out and thousands of people are on their feet clapping. And, being a performer, he loved getting that kind of gratification. But she also made his last years a lot rougher than they needed to have been. So,
Did,
that's the dark side to my story. But as Dorothy said at the end of The Wizard of Oz, but most of it was wonderful, despite the
that's
Wicked
true.
Witch and all that. There was Munchkin Land and all that.
If
So,
she was still alive, do you think you would be speaking so candidly on how, terrible she was, or would it be a little bit more low key?
yes, yes, I'll tell you that the original edition of Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House by me, came out when she was still alive. And I had been waiting to hear from someone, or waiting for that breathy phone call, or someone with a rusty potato peeler hiding in an alcove as I'm walking by, because I didn't set out to crucify her, nor did I go out of my way to defend her. I tried to just lay out things as they were, the positive elements she brought to Groucho's life, the negative stuff. But ultimately, it became a chronicle of her decline and fall, into madness. And so I thought, someday perhaps she's going to hear about this. And then it was before the book was published that I changed the listing in the phone book. I took my address out but left the number in, because I thought, all right, let her call, but I don't want her knowing where
Yeah,
I
you know
live.
what is showing up.
Yeah. And eventually I heard from someone who had heard from her, and he said, Aaron read your book. So I'm waiting for this atomic bomb response. I said, all right, what did she say? Well, she said, there's a lie on every page. Yeah. And she was upset because you said she sold you her Pinto for $1,500 and it was only $1,200.
So she was that out of her mind that that
And I
was the thing.
said, Paul, are you telling me that I carefully detail that she was crazy and all the nutty things and harmful things? And she's upset about the price of the Pinto. And I talked to a therapist who said that's the classic thing a schizophrenic would do, is focus on a tiny detail and miss the big picture. I said, Paul, that's like a former SS officer seeing Schindler's List and saying, it is nothing but a tissue of lies. We wore our insignia on the right lapel, not the left lapel. It's like, oh, sure, we killed 6 million Jews. That's not up for dispute. But to put the insignia on the. So, yeah, that was the big sort of dud. I can't say that I was disappointed, because I really didn't want to have to square off with her at that point.
Yeah,
The
you got
only
off pretty
con
easy.
Yeah. The only contact I had with her after I left was about a year later. There was a woman doing an article for a magazine on Groucho's last years, and she interviewed me. And I got a call. I was working at the time at Universal Studios, uh, typing scripts from 11 to 8 every day. Rockford Files, Columbo, Kojak, just pushing it through my Selectric 2 typewriter.
Hmm.
And the phone rang and they said, Steve, you have a call. And it was Erin. And it was the first I had heard her voice in a year or two. And she said, I hear you've been speaking to that woman about me. Well, I think maybe what you should do, Steve, is call her and tell her you might have been wrong about a few things because you're young and it would be a shame to mess up your life this early.
That sounds vaguely like a death threat.
Yes, it's exactly like, you know how they say you're never going to hear Donald Trump say, I want you to go do this, that he would say, I would feel better if you, I would appreciate it if you, or I'm hoping that, and that way they can never accuse him of specifically ordering the crime to be committed.
Yeah, if
Like
you
a
go break
mob,
into the Capitol building, that would be great. Don't do
yeah,
it,
a
but it would be
mob
awesome.
boss, like a mob boss saying, I think Louis needs to go bye-bye. Oh
Wasn't that
no, I
whole?
just meant he should be taken to Disneyland. I never said that you should shoot him and bury his body. So yeah, that's what it was like, and all. I mean, it triggered that same mental sweatiness I got when she called me at 2:30 and said, "I understand you're in on a plot to get rid of me." And then while I was listening to her tell me maybe I need to, and she had no idea what I had said really, because the thing hadn't been written yet, and yet
But
she
she knew how
figured
bad she
she
was
knew.
herself.
And during Groucho's conservatorship hearing, I ended up giving a 3-day deposition between the two different attorneys. And that's when Erin discovered that even though I would remain forever indebted to her for the job, that didn't mean that I wasn't going to tell the truth when under oath about the things I saw. So she knew then. So she figured, yeah, if Steve talked to these people, I bet it's bad. But then she said, and I know Groucho would want you to. And
So now she's
that
trying to
was the
guilt
thing
you.
that gave me the strength to not call the woman and tell her, because I thought, how dare you drag Groucho's corpse out of the ground into this and prop it up for your personal. I know Groucho would want you to do that.
That's cruel.
And I didn't change a word of it, and it was it was balanced, which was to say it talked about how unbalanced she was, and there
Yeah, that's
weren't any
absolutely cruel to
repercussions.
do. To do that. To just like to say like, hey, I know this guy better than you did, and he would have been pissed at you. So
I
no,
know
that's mean.
Groucho would
That's
want.
awful.
I thought, you know what? For one final time, I'm going to stick up for him by letting the truth come out.
Hmm. So you were considering just calling the lady if she
I
hadn't said
wasn't.
that.
I wasn't seriously considering it, but I was seriously scared
Hmm.
because it was exactly like you said. It was a veiled threat. There wasn't anything you could specifically point to where she was saying, I'm going to hire someone to break your kneecaps or kill your cat or. But I also knew that there was sort of nothing she wasn't capable of. Even, this was before her life really spiraled down to the homelessness and all that, where she still had friends and a certain amount of influence. If she had called me from the psych unit of a hospital, it would have been easier to dismiss it as just her ravings. But in this case, I felt like she still had a secretary and friends and associates and stuff. And
It felt viable that it
yeah,
wasn't
why
just
run the
fake.
risk?
Yeah.
Because that was the thing about her, was she was so unpredictable. There was nothing that you would say was out of character. She
Hmm.
could bend over backwards to do something really generous and then completely blow a gasket over something and just read you the riot act. So there
So she's
was,
probably like
you
she's
could
definitely
you
bipolar and schizophrenic
yes,
and
you can't say, oh, she'd never do that, or she'd never say that, or that could never happen, because there's, when her behavior goes through the spectrum from such dizzying heights and plummeting depths. Anything goes, you know.
What did the publishers of the book think? Were they like, maybe you shouldn't, like, later on, once you had written it and you were
Oh,
considering what to put in and what not, were they iffy on it?
I didn't get any notes. They had their attorney go through it, and there was nothing they said you need to soften this or you can't say that. Um, One of the people who was one of Aaron's friends that was around the house a lot was Bud Cort, who was in Harold and Maude.
Okay.
Uh, and he was a sort of the strange, childlike adult. And he, at one point, he took advantage of Groucho's hospitality by arranging for a party at a Christmas party at the house that eventually, apparently, Groucho said he never approved of, and Bud ordered all of his weird hippie druggy friends over. So in the book, I mentioned that, but in addition to other positive stuff. And when the book came out, Bud called me and threatened to sue me, saying these are lies. These things never happened, and I was Groucho's good friend, and you shouldn't have said these things, and I want you to recall the book. And I said, I don't have the power to do that. It's out and about. Well, you're going to be hearing from my lawyer. Oh,
Never
shit.
did?
So I hung up the phone and I called the publisher because I called the publisher and he had a sort of, well, let's see what happens. Then I get a letter from his attorney saying it is causing great injury to my client, and we must. So I called the publisher and I said, I got this thing from an attorney. I never got a threatening letter from an attorney before. And he said, who is the attorney? And I read the name off the bottom of the letter, and he started laughing. And I said, why are you laughing? I'm scared to death. And he said, Bud's lawyer works at the same firm as the guy that vetted your manuscript, who's a partner in the firm. He's the boss of the guy that sent you that letter. And besides, Bud would have to prove that your book was preventing him from making a living. There would have to be a legal proceeding where Spielberg would have said, I was going to hire Bud Cort to star in a movie, but then I read a book about Groucho Marx that said he once took advantage of Groucho's hospitality, and now I don't want to hire him. So nothing came of it. The only thing and I guess I didn't need to do this, but it is in my nature to want to smooth things over and not leave someone mad at me. It's an unpleasant feeling. So I told Bud, I said, here is what I will do. If the book ever gets a reprint, I will include what you had to say. And he said, okay, all right. So now that was 96. In 2012, I added a chapter. The book was reissued, an expanded version with a chapter on things that happened to people, including me, after the hardcover came out. And in it, I tell the whole story I just told you, which is Bud Cort threatened to sue me, and his attorney worked under the attorney for the thing. And so in honoring my offer to Bud, I made things worse, of course, by holding him up to ridicule by saying, can you believe, I mean, I didn't say this, but the implication is, can you believe how petty and pathetic it is that he would threaten legal action over this 2-line thing in this book? And then I add in the new section the story of that happening. So he called me up, and I think his words were fat piece of shit. Not referring to himself. And that's where it has lain. Because of course he could not prove that I was keeping him from making he's had his own rough time. because I mean, he was really doing well in the 70s, and then he was in an auto accident that almost killed him. And he went through a number of surgeries to, put his face back together. And I think it also had an impact on him mentally.
Hmm.
And he's done other stuff since then, but that was a sort of, I don't know if you know anything about the actor Montgomery Clift, but he was
Not really, no.
just jaw-droppingly handsome. And he started out in the late 40s and into the early 50s, made some films with Elizabeth Taylor. And then he was almost killed in an auto accident, and his looks were altered, and his mind was altered by the fact that his looks were altered.
Hmm.
And even though he continued to appear in films, he couldn't play this pretty young guy anymore. And it's, unfortunate. So Bud has had, rough times, but it wasn't really Aaron. It was Bud threatening legal action, but nothing came of it. But I thought it was an astonishing coincidence when the publisher said his attorney works under the guy that vetted your manuscript. Don't worry about it.
So
It's
those
easy to tell someone don't worry about it. It's another thing to not worry about it.
that is 100% true. Wait, so are those the only people that have really given you any problems, Aaron and Bud?
Yeah, and then I guess those are pretty low key. I mean, other people have been beaten up or sued and made penniless. I can make myself penniless on my own I don't need anyone to sue me. So yeah, I haven't really, as I've gotten into adult life and responsibilities and stuff, I haven't really run into enemies out to get me, uh, you know, and somehow, and I've still managed to be true to myself somehow, which is a tough needle to thread, because I
Hmm.
don't humor people and kiss their ass.
Do you think
So
that's why Groucho liked you?
he did respect people that were true to themselves. He couldn't take hypocrisy or phonies or kiss ass people, even if they had uh, opinions and beliefs that were opposed to him. Like, he was a lifelong Democrat and was pretty liberal for someone born in 1890. I
Yeah.
mean, he had some very old-fashioned ideas that, women were basically for sex and having children, and but he also respected, I mean, he had great respect for Gerald Ford's wife, Betty Ford,
It drives
because
me
she
nuts
was
when people hold people from, like you said, what was he born? Like 1890? Was that when he was born?
1890.
Yeah, because
He was,
you weren't sure if it was 90 or 95 for a while, right?
oh yeah, it was very common for celebrities to shave 5 years off their age to try to buy them a few extra years. Even now, actresses don't want to say how old they are.
Hmm.
And you'll sometimes, although it's harder now to just out and out give a fake date, because with the internet you can find documents. And but a number of books about the Marx Brothers had said Groucho was born in 1895. And in one of my first phone calls to Aaron Fleming before I had met Groucho, I said, while I have you on the phone, there's something I was wondering. Um, some of the books I've read say Groucho was born in 1895 and some 1890. Which is it? And she said, Groucho, when were you born? And in the distance, I hear October 2nd, 1890. And she said, did you hear? And I thought, oh my God,
Were
he
you
was
shitting
in
your
the
pants?
room. Oh
Because
my God, Groucho Marx himself answered the question. I mean, it was just electrifying to get that confirmation that way, unexpectedly.
that drives me nuts though when people like you said 1890, when people would hold someone from a generation they know nothing about up to the standards that they're used
Oh,
to. That is
that
something.
is that is a pet fury of mine. First of all, as a rule, I dislike political correctness.
Hmm.
I think George Carlin said political correctness was censorship masquerading as manners or
Yeah.
politeness or something. Worse than that is retroactive political correctness. How could these actors have ever appeared in blackface? Why did why did they make the pawnbroker a Jewish guy? Why did the Irishman drink in that movie? How could Groucho's whistling at women and wiggling his eyebrows? That's so sexist. That objectifies women and blah blah blah. And it's like you can't do that. I mean, you can, but it's so colossally unfair to go back. And I do worry about that because a lot of things are getting censored or hard. I mean, look what just recently some Dr. Seuss books were labeled racist and pulled from shelves. And it's like, come on, man, it's Dr. Seuss. And he wrote these in the 40s. Can I give you a Dr. Seuss story?
Absolutely. I loved it. I was a huge Dr. Seuss fan. But real quick, I was just gonna say, yeah, that's something that I've just it drives me nuts because I
Yes.
have no problem if someone says like I the way that I live is different than the things that Dr. Seuss says. So I'm not going to expose my children to it because I don't like that. I think that is incredibly valid. That makes sense. You know, you're not going to show someone, you know, something that someone wrote 200 years ago because it's going to be completely different than what you like now. But to say that because of that, you know,
Get rid of them.
you are morally higher because if you were around in
Right.
1940 or 1950, you would have been that much better. Everyone else was weak-minded, and you are this strong. It's like the people who say like, "Oh, well, if I went back, I would have killed Hitler." It's like
Yeah.
what? Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you would be worse than everyone else. How do you know? You're
The
not.
Germans tried and got close but didn't make it. But yeah, it's like, well, if he really respected African Americans, he would have refused to work in blackface. So he's guilty. Or, Washington had slaves, so let's tear down schools with his name on it.
Mhm.
There's no sense of historical context. There's no, this was legal then, or this was commonplace then, or.
Or the idea that
So,
you can do something terrible that at the time you don't think of it as terrible, and now you go like, "Oh my god, I can't believe they would do that. That's miserable. How could you do it? How could you be a
and the
morally good?"
people around them didn't think that it was terrible.
Yeah, so they didn't.
So
Yeah, it wasn't like they were
why were they supposed to be valiant crusaders 100 years ahead of their time?
when they
Yeah,
probably didn't even know
Groucho.
that it was wrong. A lot
No,
of
it's
times.
only perceived as wrong now. I mean, that's always going to happen. Where it's like, well, no, I know in previous cultures this was frowned upon, but this time it's really bad, and this time it really does need to be banned forever. We can't. I'm glad that on TCM it sometimes makes me bristle a little that they'll be apologetic before showing a movie with like a black maid.
Hmm.
But I would rather that they say that and then show it uncut than say we don't want to get letters from people who are offended saying it's an unflattering stereotype that reinforces the subservience of um, years ago. A guy that ran a used bookstore out here had Dr. Seuss's address in La Jolla, California.
Hmm.
And he said, "Do you want it?" And I thought, I'll take a chance. So I wrote Dr. Seuss a letter and he answered it. And it was surreal to look at the back of the envelope and see Dr. Seuss, 123, whatever, La Jolla, I mean, it was like getting a letter from Santa Claus that this person actually existed. And the bookseller had said, he'll sign books, but he won't draw anything. So I asked if I could send a book to be signed. And I also told him that when I was living in New York, there was a restaurant that served green eggs and ham. And the eggs were green because they made them with pesto. And I said, even though that's not the same as in your book, I felt like I was able to enter like Alice in Wonderland into your book. And so I sent a book to be signed. And I just said, if you feel the urge to doodle almost anything, I promised not to make any effort whatsoever to eradicate it. And he sent the book back, and he had drawn a little green egg with rays coming out of it and said, "Herewith, one green egg for Steve Stoliar from Dr. Seuss."
So you broke
So,
the mold. You were the first person to get that drawing.
well, other people have. I see them floating around for a lot of money, but these aren't going anywhere. Anyway, he wrote a book called The Lorax about um, animals that get displaced when their trees are cut down.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a story in the LA Times about a logging community in Northern California, and um, kids whose parents were tree cutters
Mm-hmm.
were coming home from school and putting their fathers on the spot and saying, "How come you make the animals have to leave where they live by cutting the trees down?" So the parents were upset by that, and the school decided the best thing to do was remove the book from the school library. So they
Mm-hmm.
banned the Lorax. And, as I say, I can't stand political correctness or retroactive. So I sent a letter to Seuss saying, "I assume you too were annoyed that they removed the Lorax because the loggers were upset about it." And I said, "I suppose next they're going to ban green eggs and ham because of the cholesterol, or How the Grinch Stole Christmas because it wasn't a multi-denominational look at the holiday season."
Yeah.
So he wrote me back. His stationery had a pre-printed Cat in the Hat, but then he drew a word balloon coming out of the cat that said, "I'm a dirty old cat and should be expunged from the schoolhouse." And then he wrote, "Dear Steve, thank you for a wonderfully refreshing letter. If they ever go after the cat, I will surely enlist your help, Dr. Seuss."
That
And
must have
it's
felt
like,
amazing.
it was great. And it's a treasure now, but how strange then to read that what I saw as wildly exaggerated, obviously this isn't going to happen, is kind of like what's been going on with censorship and with declaring Dr. Seuss a racist and pulling some of his books off the shelves. And it's like it has come to pass that instead of understanding historical perspective, it's easier to just get rid of it. And,
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought the idea is like I said, with children, I totally understand the idea, and I'd say I really agree with it. It's the sentiment of telling kids this is, obviously, well, I guess obviously, to our standards, these things are not acceptable. So you should, but don't tell the kids that they can't learn about it, because you know what those kids are going to do? They're going to revolt. They're going to go, "Why can't I learn about this?" And I think that ends
yes,
up making people worse.
then it's the forbidden fruit. Then they're reading Mark Twain by flashlight under their sheets like Playboy or something like that, because they want to see the dirty words that we're not supposed to read.
And I think it ends up doing the opposite of what it should be. You should teach people this is what was written.
Yes.
You probably should not think of it as being fully okay or in any way okay. But what are you going to do? Say like, "Oh, you can't read this book because it has old ideas." Like, this is history. At the end of the day, a book
Yes.
is history, and you're not going to just
Yes.
start censoring history because it's
It
like that whole
is
thing. You're going to repeat it.
it is a remnant of a reflection of the time in which it was written. So you're going to get phrases and characters and situations that would be frowned upon now, but then explain to people this was written in 1875. And instead of just saying, "Let's sanitize the text or ban them from the library." It's
Hmm.
just, I mean, as a creative person, which I am on occasion, it really pisses me off to see that kind of straitjacketing. And you hear a lot of comedians talk about we can't play colleges anymore because we get hissed and booed, because the minute you start to get into anything remotely ethnic or sexual, you get the people having hissy fits over, that's unacceptable. It's uh, what's inappropriate, that
Hmm.
awful word. it's inappropriate. And you do that to comedy, and I don't know what you're left with if you can't get into anything. I mean, so much of classic comedy had to do with dialects, people doing accents, people playing different roles. And now it's like, no, we need to have an actual hunchbacked French bell ringer playing Quasimodo. Otherwise, you're taking that job from a hunchbacked French bell ringer.
Yeah. And it
And
ends up
that's
just, it makes people go crazy, I think. I mean, it makes people worse. It really,
because,
it's the, you're right. It's the forbidden fruit. It's like, okay, I want people to not be bad. So I'm going to tell them that they can't even learn about the bad things. And then people go, you know what? Fuck you. I'm going to learn about it. And then it really tricks people, I think, in their brain. And it says, I'm not just going to learn about it. Well, guess what? The fact that you told me I can't learn about it, guess what? Now I agree with it. And they might not even agree with it, but it's people are just so,
well,
easy to
sometimes, I mean,
manipulate.
the pendulum will swing the other way. Like conservative parents can end up with a kid that's super liberal, or hippie parents can have a son who's conservative. So sometimes that's the natural progression of things. But yeah, by denying it and saying you must not read this, you make it all the more attractive. So
My father knew a family. They were all incredibly religious, and it was like it was all about Jesus, all about God. You can't curse. You can't, eat this on a Friday. All the kids, there was like these two kids, and they dressed the same. Soon as they left their mother, apparently they just like were hurting people and were in prison for
oh
like
wow,
terrible thing. Like they were
because they were
so
suppressed for all those years. You push down, and then you finally let go, and the spring goes kaflooey.
exactly. Yeah, like
Yeah.
I've always had very democratic parents. And but they were pretty even when it comes to like drinking and shit. Like when I was a kid, if I wanted to, my dad was like drinking a beer. It was never an issue. There was never like oh, you can't do this. There's limitations about that. I think that's part of the reason that I'm overall, I think I'm a hothead, but I'm pretty level-headed when it comes to, like that kind of extremist stuff that I never had that feeling of being isolated from it. So I never really had that revolting period. You know what I mean?
Very difficult being a level-headed hothead.
It's yeah, I say it's like I'm a hothead, but the hot-headedness comes from me just being an asshole, not from, wanting to stick it to someone, you know what I mean?
Right.
But
Makes sense to me.
there's actually talk about we were earlier saying Robert Cialdini and his wife. I apologize, I'm keeping you long, by the way. I hope that's not an
Well,
issue.
no, I do have to feed my cat at some point, but yes.
Well, they're starting to light off fireworks outside my house anyway, so it's cutting me off anyway. That's
Okay.
just New York City how it is. But I
You
was gonna s-
assume they're fireworks if it's New York City.
no, you can I've
No,
now
I
been able
know.
to quickly
Yes.
fairly accurately
Differentiate.
tell the difference. At first,
Okay.
not so much, but you start to get used to it.
All right.
But I was gonna
What's
say,
your point?
Cialdini has a whole chapter in his book of psychology, this of influence, and how just like the wanting, the lack of access to something will make people want something they don't want. He talks about this whole thing about how a city or a town banned guns, and they said that or no, sorry, there's the opposite. They had to own a gun. Everyone had to have a gun in their house. It was one town. This whole chapter is, or like a large section of this one chapter is about this. You had to have a gun, so you had to go buy one. You had to have it in the house, or you'd be fined if you were proven that you didn't have one. And everyone thought, oh, great, everyone's buying guns because all of these gun stores were selling an insane amount of weapons. And they said they went in there and they talked to these people, and it was completely contradictory to that idea that if you don't have access to it, you want it more, because it's like, why are they selling more if they're forced to have one? And all these people at the gun store said it's people from out of town who heard about the town because of the law.
Ah,
They said no one from in town. They said in the last, I think this one store owner said in the last month, one person from the town has come to get a gun. We're sold out. Like we're
right.
selling out every day because people are coming in and buying it, but no one from the town, because the fact that they were told that they had to have it in a
Right.
part of the country where they are very supportive of having guns made them not want them, which I
Oh,
think
yeah?
is
I'll
so
show you. I'm going to get rid of the guns I have. I'll
exact.
show you.
It's exactly it. But yeah, no, that's just something that I don't think people take that into account, you know? But
Psychology of.
everyone should
Well,
go read.
sir,
Yeah.
shall we draw to a close for
Let's do it.
now?
I hope I covered enough topics and didn't go on too long on
It
tangents.
depends if anyone is still listening. If not, then we went on too long. But
Exactly.
I should say, just in the interest of a shameless plug, that if someone would like to read my memoir, Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House, the Kindle and audiobook are available on Amazon. And if they would like a copy of the book that for me to sign or personalize to you, you can go to Steve Stoliar, STEVESTOLIAR.com and order a copy, and I'll be happy to inscribe it to you. And I will also add that the book is currently in active development as a motion picture.
With
So it
Rob
will be
Zombie,
very
right?
strange. No, he was attached to it. He's not now.
Oh,
But even though he and I are still buds, but it's still moving forward. And it's going to be very strange to see someone playing me at 20.
who do you want to play you?
I'm sure someone I've never heard of because I don't know actors and actresses in their 20s. But we've got good casting people and production people on it. So
Did it get
we will
purchased by a
see.
studio yet?
They bought the book rights from me,
Mm-hmm.
and I co-wrote the screenplay, and I'm co-executive producer. But other than that, I don't have much to do with it.
Do you have any like general timeline when it's going to come out?
Well, we have to shoot it first. There's that snag. We'd like to shoot it by the end of the year. It has to do with lining up the 3 leads, and we're partway there. Can't divulge more than that, but it's going to be certainly something personally for me to see, and hopefully more than just my immediate family.
Well, that's awesome. I can't wait to see it. Steve, thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Mr.
much for
Scott.
coming on.
My pleasure. Take
I
care.
I appreciate it. And to everyone who, Steve, will you stick around for just 1 second afterward, real quick?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Thank you to everyone who watched. The replay of this will be up in a couple hours. And I'll see you all next week, next Friday. Peace, everyone.
Wow.